one? Oh, it's up. You can see it? You can see us? Oh. Okay, yeah, that's just a picture. But the video should have started now if you click on it. Is there anything you can click that says join or start? No? No, there should be something you can click on. No, there should be something you can click on. Uh-oh, looks like I just stopped it anyway. All right, we'll try the other way. So I'll just try to video call you right now. So you should be, okay, I'm calling you now. Yeah, answer. You said you had something that you could answer? We could also do it on Facebook if this one doesn't work. I do it on Facebook with someone else. Which one, Facebook? Okay. 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 You do? Where? Oh. All right. You can see me talking right now. Okay, good. Yeah, I can hear you. So that'll work. We'll use this one. Okay, I'll hang up the phone. Jerry? Yeah. Hi. How are you? Oh, that's weird. We can see you too. Oh, well, whatever. I don't know what's happening, but we can see you and you can. We do have one of these if you want your notes. You did? Okay. It's unlocked downstairs, but I want the top one. Some sort of security. What's the name of this one first? It's the Richard's comment. So I guess we can put you in the hot seat up here, Julian. Yeah. We have, yeah, sorry, this is just, I don't know if
You wanted to ask me questions?
oh, well, yeah, well, there's another guy on this computer here, so, he just needs to look at you. But yeah,
Better read up on my performance.
Sure. Well, if you want, we could start with reading this. It's actually quite thought-provoking, and then maybe we'll provoke some of your thoughts, but also, yeah, what you wrote in there. We can ask you about that. Slow down. Yeah, I think it'd be good if you don't mind if we just start. If you read this, it's just provoking. Just the implications of scenario. Today's Julian Fell's constitution, December 2001, 21st century, reminds me of my wrestling against the standard pro-biblical archaeological British treatment of Sumerian cuneiform back during the early through mid-1950s. How should we read the Akkadian and later Semitic rendering of cuneiform, especially in light of the obvious functional content Sumerian cuneiform to the Sumerian culture, which was an offshoot of the Davidian Maritime Cultures language group? I have some well-developed
strong feelings on this matter, an issue closely related to my perpetual horror of hearing what passed for baby boomers' attempts at academically literate mouthings of classical poetry and drama. Reading from the written text itself will tend to promote the works of reading from the remembered text in memory. Sometimes, Julian Fell's appreciation of features of his father's engineering work points in a relevant direction. The dead-mindedness of forms of grammatical speech consistent with the influence of Aristotle is typical of the problem, as the New York Times style book on spelling, punctuation, and prose composition is an even more morally degenerate conception of prose and poetic composition than that of the brain-deadening Aristotle. The essence of the problem, the same problem posed implicitly by bilingual matching, is the attempt to reduce statements to a symbolically colored form of essentially deductive exposition. The problem parallels and overlaps the fallacies associated with the delusion that the application of statistics to financial accounting is the basis for economics. To summarize the core of the argument, the distinction between human behavior and that of hidebound deductionists is that in cognitive communication, the verbal action always transforms the subject matter in the same general sense that a chemical reaction does. It, deduction, virtually does not exist functionally in a literate form of human communication. For example, in literate thought, one never thinks I am. One thinks of what one has been made to become to be. Nations and peoples do not exist. The same people generally, as for Plato and Heraclitus before him, nothing exists but change. By change, we should signify essentially the process of transformation, linking two successive points of observation or some kindred notion of change as a meaningful basis for acts. In classical poetry, this role of change is expressed most clearly by the functions of irony, especially metaphor, the essential mode of action which defines any such poem, metaphor situated in irony. These nested ironies are usually brought into existence for the audience as a juxtaposition of different voices within a single statement, or a kindred juxtaposition of integral statements. In classical poetry, this function of voicing is adapted from those natural potentials of the human singing voice, which are brought out and brought under control only through the Florentine bel canto mode. For example, instrumental music does not exist. The racket which the feral nightly cats make among the pans and lids of the alleyway, or pianos performed similar ultimate effect. All true music, performed with man-made instruments, is a voice taught to sing in imitation of the qualities of music. If a simple literal matching of languages cannot contain the idea expressed by each, how might the meaning of an unfamiliar language be a astrogation and related study of ancient astronomical calendars point to a general principle for solving such problems. In each of the latter cases, we have a real object, the universe. By aid of observations of that reality, man attempts to master talent. For example, in cases of ancient navigation, the included subject matter of any symbolic records left is implicitly obvious. The trick is to get inside the mind of the navigator and his party, and imagine that we are that person in that situation. The general principle involved is typified by the case of a Riemannian differential geometry, as I have applied this to the material of the science of physical economy. You may recognize what is said from adducing the kind of reality which corresponds to the geometry of the relevant set of utterances. That situation points to the importance of a certain sense about historical specificity. So, for example, the case of Sumer, as emphasized by the account of the historian Herodotus. From him, we are informed that the Phoenicians ancient Sheba, ancient Abyssinia, and Sumer were among the colonies founded by a maritime culture ostensibly dominating the relevant regions of the Indian Ocean during the period preceding the Aryan invasion of the continent. The sundry archaeological fragments show a relatively powerful such maritime culture of broadly Dravidian language pedigree during that interval. Aryan data. To situate these developments, including the Aryan descent of South Asia, we must take into account the most catastrophic phases of the post-17th millennium, BC glacial melt, and the succession of climate changes, especially from about 10,000 BC onward. In brief, we must situate the shards of evidence and their relationship to one another in the physical geography, the phases of ongoing transformations, the geometry of the relative. We must, in a certain sense, reawaken in ourselves a memory of the quality of passions which must have occurred in those ancient times. Two plays by Schiller, his earlier Don Carlos, and his later Wallenstein trilogy. When we study closely the actual history of the events in which Schiller situates those dramas, as he does in the case of Jeanne d'Arc, the passions which Schiller reawakens are revealed to us as the appropriate passions experienced by the referenced events in real life, as real life is to be situated in the historical specificity of those places, times, and conditions. Nor can we overlook the historical specificity of the distance and length between those historical events of the past, and the audience experiencing the dramatic examination of real history. Both of the first two tragedies reference the decadence of Europe under the tyranny of the Habsburg dynasty. Spain falling victim to Charles I and his successors through the period of the evil of 1511 to 1648 religious wars orchestrated by Venice on behalf of their Habsburg tool. It is as we situate the communications to be studied within the cognitive grasp of the historical specificity of the geometry of the situation, and the situation defined by the past's relevance for the present, that the actual meaning of the communication may be adduced, and in no different way. In the diffusion of culture, the most significant events are not the translation of doctrines of one language into another, but the way in which the common cognitive elements of the communication and related practice is expressed similarly or dissimilarly in each. Problem is the modern academic and related miseducation and related prejudices. Overlooks the act of hearing and the inner faculty of the mind, where the functional faculty behind the mere shadows called words is to be found. Yeah, but just if you want to say what the difference was, this, can you see him on there?
This was ugly guy.
Okay, yeah, you have to look at yourself, yeah.
That's not my favorite thing.
But if you want to start with this difference between this bilingual matching that everyone else did and why that ran out of juice, and then what your father did to deal with that.
Yeah, well, there exists on this planet a large. Oh, shut up! Sorry. Sorry, that was my host. Where was I? Okay, yes. There have existed a large number of languages on this planet, and everyone an ancestor. Languages are no different than people themselves. You go back definitely to, forever, as long as there's been a DNA-based life form. So they evolve over time. As life evolves, so does languages among those animals that are capable of producing languages. And humans are smart enough that eventually they produce written forms of communication. In fact, what distinguishes, I believe, humans from all other animal types is that we have the ability to communicate between generations that do not actually meet. That is, you can carve something on a rock, and a descendant 100 years from now can come along and read it and get your message. This method of writing, mostly they started out pictographically, but over time, sophisticated societies developed symbolic writing systems and eventually phonetic writing systems. But like all societies, they rise and fall. They get overrun by neighbors, the weather changes, and these languages just die out. And some predominate over others, and others just simply disappear. Well, the same for writing systems. So archaeologists rummaging around in ruins everywhere are finding rocks with inscriptions on them, or temples, or huge structures. And you can't read because it's not written in Latin script. We can't just read it correctly. Well, how do you figure out what it says? Well, historically, occasionally you find plates with inscriptions in two languages. And this enables a comparison, because usually they say the same thing. And this is, and even if the words are different, if you have words, relatively unrelated languages written on the same tablet, proper names of people and names of places are consistent. You know, we have different words than other languages for all sorts of things, but our word for Cairo, Egypt is the same, our word for Moscow. I think someone's trying to get a hold of me desperately. We'll take a break later. I think my host wants to know what I'm doing. So how do we decipher them? The only way that we could decipher them in the past was by this comparison of scripts, assuming that they're saying the same thing, or if they're bilingual, in which case, because a lot of contracts were written in two languages. And that way, assuming they say the same thing, you can compare the letters and come up with equivalents. Rosetta Stone is perhaps the most famous one, but there are others. But decipherment of unknown scripts is relying upon this finding bilingual context, either on the same tablet or statements referring to the same subject if it contains proper nouns, which would be the names of gods, the names of people, or the names of places. In those cases, you can get a direct comparison of phonetic values. What Barry did, because there's a large number of a large number of undeciphered scripts in the Mediterranean area, maybe a dozen and a half or so, is that he realized that what's called a phoneme, that is the sound assigned in language to a certain symbol, or your symbols are assigned to certain sounds. These sounds remain remarkably constant. In fact, they're extremely reliable. The same concept will carry the same sound through thousands of years, which meant that if you compare languages based on phonemes, you can get pronunciations. And pronunciations, in turn, give you the words. And then if they're related, you can find their word roots are consistent. Word roots are very consistent. For example, the Indo-European class of languages extends all the way from Bay of Bengal, from Bengali, all the way to Scandinavia and to the far Portugal, basically. These languages are all related. They use similar structures. They use similar word roots. They may look quite different, like Hindu Indian is written in what's called Devanagari script, which doesn't look anything like Roman at all. It looks like squiggly lines going along, written under the line. But phonetically, it's really not much different from in its ancestral form of Sanskrit. It's very little different from Latin. Same word roots, same grammatical structures. Indo-European languages tend to be highly inflected. And so when the meaning of a word changes, the spelling and pronunciation of the word is altered slightly. English is a very bad example of that because we are the most uninflected Indo-European language. The only inflections we use, we put an S on the end of nouns for plurals, and the third singular of the present tense has an S on the end.
And inflection is not in your voice, it's just
no. Inflection linguistically does not mean how you speak. It's how a word is altered to give it a different meaning. For example, a Latin verb can have up to over 100 different spellings to account for all the tenses, the numbers, the cases, all the different parts, the ways it can be restructured, passive, active mood, the voice, whether it's subjunctive, indicative, interrogative, heraldic. I should take a break. I'm sorry.
That's fine. Yeah. Do you want to?
Yeah. Where was I? Yeah. Inflection. Oh yes, inflections. Actually, inflection is indicative of a rather sophisticated language, but the earlier forms you can get by with pidgin language forms very easily, just staying in present tense and just simple using simple nouns. Okay, these inscriptions found, the tablets with inscriptions on them found widely and over the planet, went largely undeciphered because they didn't have bilinguals. So following the two principles, one, that every language is descended from something else which may be known or will give rise to something which may be known, and the constancy of the sounds through the words change, but the sounds remain the same. It sounds odd, but that's the way it goes. So by using a statistical analysis, it is possible to take a good guess at what the pronunciations are of a descended language or an ancestral language based on a known form. It is also fairly likely that the language you're dealing with is related to a geographically nearby language. People didn't travel around a whole lot in the past. And using these techniques and statistical analysis, Barry was able to figure out the probable pronunciations of a large number of the symbols, what we call letters now, of these unknown scripts. And it turns out that they are, for the most part, related to a nearby language and descendant from or were ancestral to a known language. And this made it possible to basically derive alphabets, and then it's a process that builds, and that you guess the most common ones, and then from that you can then go to the less common, less frequently occurring ones. And it tends to be self-correcting in that if you get the wrong one, you get a combination of letters that does not occur naturally. You know, we think of that you could put any letters together, but in English language, how often do you find a Z followed by a P? You know, it's things like that. When you actually go through an analysis, a lot of letter combinations do not occur. And if you've got the wrong guess, this is what comes out of the script that you're deriving. But if you get the right guess, it makes sense. So it sort of self-corrects as it goes. The other advantage of it is that it enables analysis fairly quickly of complex languages that, whereas before you're sitting around waiting for someone to unearth bilingual, this way you don't need that bilingual. You can just go ahead. So based on that, Barry produced a whole lot of probable alphabetic assignments to most of these unknown languages. And that's as far as I got in my LaRouche articles. But Barry worked almost entirely with European languages because that was all that interested him. But people hearing about him would bring him stuff that they dug up in North America and say, you know, we dug this up in Oklahoma, and it's got this on it. What does it say? And he looks at it and he says, that's Celtic, or it's Basque, or it's whatever the language. I think someone. May I take a break? This person seems to be desperate.
No problem.
All right, he's just taking a break. Can you hear okay? Okay. Yep. Just mute yourself unless you want to ask a question. Huh? All right. Are you asking how you mute yourself? Oh, there should be a button on the computer or a microphone at the top. Looks like tomorrow it is raining.
God was testing you.
Yeah, it looks like we'll probably have to.
Basically, Hermine is basically working to solve something. System is true to
Did you find the mute thing, Guy? Hey, Guy. Hey, Guy. Maybe he muted us. What's that? Can you hear us? Hey, Guy. Oh, you can hear. Okay. Did you mute yourself? Did you figure that out? Yeah. 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 Okay.
That's like top of the so, you know, mid-70s. One field that, you know, they spoke more than the so the frost, rain, surface, stuff still there. Village, big village, you know, away from the ocean. One thing is facing south, sun, source of transportation. Time, you know, go for time. Yeah. Climate is different. Coastal is different. Ice ages built up on from straight down. You know, post higher, you know, eventually. It's high over this, but it's more like, you know,
Yeah.
well, well, this, one of the artifacts I found, trying to doors that was the best thing down there. I was really lucky. Was home back.
Yeah, like maybe the letter would be different, but it'd have
Well,
the same sound. They could have a different shape for the letter, but it would have
kind
the
of
sound.
skin off the sides.
And so they say, well, there's
Made out of stone.
can be
This one's just.
the shape of the letter.
Home back. Lines.
It was the airline telling me I
Oh.
found my luggage.
Oh, right, I guess that.
Good news, but I didn't need that introduction. Okay, where were we? What? Yeah, switching to North America. This is the part that hasn't been written yet. Is that they were finding these inscriptions all over North America, and they're matching up to the European scripts. And the appearance is that there has been very long-term, widespread transoceanic travels by people in the past. And by past, I mean going back to 2000 BC, as far back as that. We know the Vikings did it, but that was, I regard the Vikings as Johnny-come-latelys. They're only 1,000 years ago. We have Islamic inscriptions. We have pre-Islamic Arab inscriptions. We have Basque inscriptions. There are Celtic inscriptions, and they're not all over the place. They're concentrated. Like the Celtic ones are all concentrated in New England. The Basque ones are found in Pennsylvania.
So it was Irish here before the Irish came?
Well, Celtic, it was far more widespread. You know, Celts are one of the major groups in Europe. There was a Celtic set. The Celts were all the way from Iberia to Turkey. There was a major Celtic presence in Turkey, and through Central Europe, all of France and Britain. And of course, they've been squeezed now. The Celts had a very long-going rivalry with the Romans. You know, 300 BC, there was a major conflict between Rome and the Celts. The Celts won. They beat the living bejesus out of the Romans, and the Romans had this fanatical hatred for Celts. They were on ever since then. These are things you don't mention. That's not mentioned in Caesar's Gallic Wars, which is usually what you read when you study Latin. If anyone studies Latin anymore, I don't know. I wasn't sure. I lost my notes when I was coming here. It's in my luggage. So, and like all researchers, particularly those with dyslexia, I write stuff down and then I erase, or up here it self-erases. So without my notes, I'm kind of dead. Most of the Celtic inscriptions are found in New England. And the interesting thing is that it's an older form of Celts. It's the because the later version of Ogham, it's called Ogham writing with strokes, vertical strokes is that the later forms had vowels included. Most of the earlier forms of writing were consonantal. That is phonetic, they represent sounds, but only the consonants. A good reason for that is that, in fact, the vowels change with inflection. So writing them down isn't particularly necessary. If you take an English language sentence and delete all the vowels from it and just write the consonants, you'll find you can read it fairly easily. There might be finer details that you miss, but for the most part, you can read it. And a very large number of languages are consonantal. The Semitic languages, Arabic, and today it's very few. Arabic is basically the only surviving Semitic language, but 2,000–3,000 years ago, there was about half a dozen of them. They're written, and they're also written from right to left. That's another thing to get used to. And typewriters in these languages actually move the other way. Anyone know what a typewriter is anymore? Yeah, we type and it moves across. The carriage moves this way as we type along. Well, in a Semitic language, it moves the other direction as you type along. It's like a clock that goes in the other direction. It works just as well. It's just different. That's all. So that was about it. Also, another thing Barry traced down is that in several instances, he believes as many as half a dozen, the native Indians had, in fact, their own writing systems. And typically what happens is that along come your missionaries. And if the local people have a language, they learn the writing system and then they translate their religious stuff into the local language. If the locals don't have a writing system, then the Roman system is adapted to that language, and the language is written in the Latin letters, in the Roman letters. We have in the north with the Assiniboines and up north with the Inuit a very simple consonantal writing system. In fact, it could be considered alphabetical because each consonant is rotated according to what vowel goes with it. So only the consonants are written, but according to the way whether they're written upside down, sideways, or whatever, you can actually know what vowel follows it. So you have a consonant followed by a vowel written in one. The northern, the Inuit and the Assiniboines use the same phonetic values for these letters, but the languages are totally different. They're not related in any way whatsoever.
Which one?
I believe the Assiniboine of northern Ontario, and northern Michigan, and I think it's the Assiniboine, and a northern of the we call them Eskimos, Inuit, the Dene tribes of far northern Canada. And what they were enabled by the missionaries as one particular missionary learned their script, and then he carved, actually out of wood, font letters that he could then print. So that meant when you have a printed writing form, literacy spreads very, very quickly. So he'd print very simple prayers and things like that using these native script forms on paper, and then these could be distributed widely. And of course, it's a means of spreading propaganda, but for these native peoples, they were delighted to get their language, which formerly belonged to only their wise men, so to speak, who sort of kept it to themselves. See, I'm not the only one. So these people were able to sort of literally teach themselves their own language by having available these simple prayers, which they used as textbooks. They weren't so much concerned with what it said, but they liked the fact that they could, using these papers, they could then learn what their own writing said. No, well, that was one of the things, one of the pluses or the curses the Europeans brought with them.
And they want to write something on, they don't support something on rock or something like that.
Yeah, the advantage of writing on rock is that it lasts a very long time.
Yeah.
And that is why the languages that descend, the ancient scripts that descend to us that we know about, and we think particularly of Egyptian, it's not because the Egyptians were fabulously important in history, it's because their writing was on rocks and has survived to the present. The stuff that went on clay tablets that dissolved over time is lost. Stuff on paper, it's very convenient for us, but if every library burned down, it's gone. And as someone who's worked in museums, I can tell you other forms of transmitting information that require technology, like tape recorders, DVD readers, microfiche machines, these technologies disappear. So I work for a local government, and they think they're doing something wonderful. They're taking all their paper records and making them electronic. And they say, see how easy it is to recover it. And I'm thinking, look how easy you're going to lose it. Because when the technology changes, everything that you've put into whatever microscopic chip form or magnetic tape or recording device you've got, it's going to be lost. Whereas paper will still be there. The only thing better than paper is in carving it into stone or into brick. And that will outlast everything. Whatever it's worth. Okay. How about some question and answer here? I'm running out of steam.
Mine is on the Indo-European. How if people didn't travel that much, how did this have a similarity across such a wide area?
Indo-European languages have existed for forever, basically. As have other languages. I mean, it's not just in Chinese. Chinese written script has existed for a very long time. And over time, it just gets passed on to neighbor. Technology changes according to convenience and what's available. Before paper, stone and tablets was all you wrote on. So, of course, you did your writing with chisels and styluses. When paper came along, they had to invent pens and ink. And same form. And when electronic transmission came along, they had to come up with ASCII code and stuff like that. It changes.
So it just goes back so far that there's similar roots in all the languages.
Well, to keep a language constant, you have a cultural contact. So I would say there had been maintained a cultural contact for a very long time. In fact, it's far more likely that a very ancestral form of language gave rise to daughter languages through descent rather than contact. Because the Indo-European languages are basically divided into two sides, what they call the Eastern and the Western. And there's some debate whether Russian or Slavic languages belong with the Eastern group or the Western group. And someone described Russian as simply Latin being written with Greek letters, which is actually a pretty good description. Russian is inflected like Latin. It has a lot of inflections. But it has pretty much the same roots, basic roots, as most of the European languages. In fact, the older European languages actually have more inflections than the most recent evolved forms.
You were saying earlier that the archaeologists and others insist that there were no written languages in North America.
Mm-hmm.
How do they deal with these inscriptions? Do they just claim that they're primitive drawings or that they're...
Well, the usual thing is to say, oh, it's a fake.
Right.
It was written by someone there who's trying to confuse history. Or it's a recent, someone has created it recently and just left it there to be found sometime later. Most of the time, they just ignore it. They don't pass the word around. So if someone finds a really neat inscription in Minnesota, they don't mention it to the guy in Illinois or Alabama. So the knowledge of these things doesn't go around. But mostly they're just simply put down as recent. If someone left it there to confuse history. That's invariably, or it's a fake, or it's not real. And even if you take the context, you found this rock with Celtic writing on it, and it was enclosed in a tree root, and the tree root carbon tested to 600 years ago. They ignore it. It doesn't exist. Well, I mean, you and the LaRouche group should know that. What does the press do to you guys? You don't exist. They ignore you.
How they get rid of this stuff? Because I mean, with this stuff, the cave chinchilla. Yeah. That's widely known. Why do they miss something like that?
I don't know any archaeologists that they just don't mention it. We have a gold tablet from Peru, which is so complex. It looks like it came straight off the press in Egypt. But the cartouches in it, which the cartouches is lettering that surrounds the proper names of kings or pharaohs or places, identify pharaohs that did not exist in Egypt. They were Libyan pharaohs. I have a photograph of that, which I'd love to copy. It's a very poor photograph. Unfortunately, some barbarian cut a big hole in it to take the gold out because it's on a gold sheet and used for some other purpose.
How does one make the determination between like an alphabet or a pictograph or an ideograph or what have you with a language that you don't know? How do you and related to that, in my first exposure to your dad's stuff was on the Rothschild Maui.
Yes.
And in those inscriptions, there's some of it that's basically poem, and some of it that's basically illustrations of an astronomical device or an astronomical idea. How do you know what's what?
Basically, just if it isn't one, you go on to something else. There's a certain amount of judgment involved. You have to judge from the context. The particular inscription you mentioned is the one that comes from East or West Java. I'm sorry, West, what we call New Guinea, which is a very bad name. But we haven't been able to go back to that cave and look at the inscription because it lies in the part that is now governed by Indonesia. And the Indonesians have been bringing in Indonesian government to an area where the locals don't like it. So there has been constant warfare, and the Indonesians will not allow any foreigners in there. So we tried to organize, I was very young, and Barry tried to get an expedition to go back there in the 1970s. And it fell down because the Indonesians would not give permits to go there.
And that's still the case.
As far as I know, yes. No one's in a hurry to fund it either. It's like trying to get funding for research that debunks CO2 warming. Good luck. As far as that's it, how do you distinguish? Consonantal languages typically only have 10 to 15 symbols. The exception being that one I mentioned from North America, where in fact by rotating the symbol, they can add the vowel. So that's technically a consonantal language that is actually an alphabet. An alphabet language is one that includes the consonants and the vowels. So typically in most languages, there'll be 5 to 10 vowels and up to 15 consonants. So an alphabetical language will have usually no more than 30 at the most letters. We call them letters if they're alphabetical. A consonantal inscription will only have maybe 10 to 15 different forms of lettering in it. A pictographic one, first of all, looks like images, or a character one, which is a derivative pictographic, will have thousands of different characters. So when you look at it by counting the number of symbols that appear, particularly if it's a long script, you can tell very quickly whether it's a pictographic one or a derived logographic one, or whether it is consonantal, like Arabic, or alphabetical, which is what we're accustomed to.
I think too, like they use parts of America for like other artifacts.
The trouble with artifacts is that they're just like inscriptions. Now, this is stone or a form of masonry like pottery. It just doesn't last. Anything made of wood, leather, natural products like that, rot away very quickly. If they're discarded or buried, within 100 years they're gone. So finding artifacts that are non-masonry or non-stone, you just don't find them. And most cultures do not. Advanced cultures do not, I don't eat my breakfast out of a stone bowl. Of course, recently we have glass, whiskey bottles and things like that we find. In fact, in Canada, there was a requirement that surveyors who used wooden pegs had to bury a piece of pottery next to it. So when the wood rotted away, you could relocate it by finding the pottery. And the most common pottery was a discarded whiskey bottle. Sometimes, situations force terrible things upon you.
Stop this one.
Okay.
And I can put the other guy on there.
There you go. The Celtic was concentrated in New England.
Yes.
Some other languages that were concentrated in other places.
I'd have to go back to do the ref, but yes, certain areas tend to have certain languages concentrated in them. And there's some stuff that Barry could not touch. There's a lot of people finding evidence of Chinese presence on the West Coast. And there's no logical reason to dispute that possibility. Chinese were very smart people. They traveled around just like anybody else. But my father had no knowledge of Chinese. He could not work on that at all.
So you said there are two principles or something. Every language is derived from some other language, or the words change, but the sounds for an idea remain the same. Is that what you said? The sounds for an idea?
Well, I didn't phrase that very well. You say the phonemes remain very consistent. That is, the language will continue to use the same sounds consistently over time.
But with different
And
letters.
the way they write it might change, but the sound will still be there. And say, languages like people, everything descends from an ancestor. You can just keep going back and back and back. Unless you happen to believe that we all appeared suddenly on the planet at one time. But all of us go back. And languages, assuming humans had languages for at least the last 50,000 years, languages likewise go back with the humans. So there is that ancestral connection. It's like branches on a tree. They always come back to a basic stem. However, most of them have died out. Branch goes out, falls off, dies. I imagine far more languages have disappeared off this planet than exist. We know a large number of writing systems have disappeared, but the languages they wrote have remained. They just adopted other writing systems, especially when technology changed.
Like if there was a plague or something and the people didn't know how to write the language
No, it's more change in technology. I was thinking of Iran as a good example. Actually, it's Persia. I'm sorry, it's the language. The term the Persians use for themselves is Iran because Iran is their word for Aryan. Now, thanks to Hitler, the word Aryan has a dirty connotation. But pre-Hitler, Aryan simply was a linguistic term. It just meant an Indo-European language. That's all it meant. It had no other meaning other than language. We had Semitic languages and the Aryan languages, and they were scattering. The Basque is a different language group, and there is Hungarian and Estonian and Finnish is another language group. And these, Aryan is just a linguistic term. Nowadays, it has political connotations which are ugly, so we don't use it anymore. Persian was originally inscribed on rock, and then they discovered that they could write on clay tablets, so they adopted cuneiform for writing. Same language, different writing system. And then when paper came along, that got tossed, and they started to write using Roman letters, or probably the Eastern, the Hindu, the languages from India, which also spread over Afghanistan and into what is Persia. We would write with that. But after Islam came along, which was much, much later, they abandoned the other scripts and now write their language using Arabic scripts. But it's an Indo-European language, just being written in a different script. Likewise, Urdu in Pakistan is basically Hindustani written using Arabic script instead of Devanagari script. It's kind of like they're divorcing their ancestors and going with their new religion.
What was the one before cuneiform?
I think they carved on rocks, same as complex. Basically, it was pictographic on rocks. So there's a case of a writing system adjusting to technology. Yeah, as I mentioned, you go to paper, and then you have electronic communication. And today we have photographic. You develop your writing system to match the technology you're using.
Or it can be a statement or principle, like you were saying about adopting the Arabic lettering system for some of these other languages, but Turkey did something similar.
They did the opposite.
Came in,
yeah.
And they went to the Western system.
Ataturk, I don't want to dictate what was in his mind, but I guess he decided that Turkey was more of a European country than a Semitic country. Their language group belongs to the same one as Hungarian and Estonian, and the Turkic group. He decided, I guess, it was better to go with the European script, which at that point there's two European scripts in common use at the moment. As you have the Cyrillic alphabet used by Russia, Ukraine, Bulgaria, and Serbia, and then you have the Roman script used by everybody else.
The Greeks use the Roman script.
Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah, Greek. Greek has a separate, its own language, its own script system also. Sorry. Oh, well, Cyrillic was derived from Greek.
Right.
It's a more complex form of Greek alphabet. So I suppose we could lump them together. And I said, Russian is Latin being written using Greek letters. Sorry.
Look at the homeland of the.
What is the homeland of the Arabs? Well, I'd have to assume that in recent history, it's basically Arabia. I would have to assume Arabia, but there are Semitic groups related to Arabs which occupied other surrounding areas. And also, there was a Islamic conquest went out about 700 AD and transferred Arabic culture into a whole lot of other countries. So like today, the homeland of Arabic would be any place where Arabic is the commonly spoken language. For example, the original language of Egypt was Coptic, and about 10% of the population still writes and speaks Coptic, but 90% or more than 90% has adopted the Arabic language as their language now. In the area that we somewhat crudely call Palestine, which is the Levant, the original languages were the Semitic Israeli languages, but the majority there have adopted the Arabic language of the Arabic conquerors. So is that Arabic? Or is it not? North America, we speak, for the most part now, English. That wasn't our native English. The origin of English was just England. I don't know if that's answered your question.
Where does the language of Kemetic language coming from?
Where?
Kemetic.
I'm sorry, I don't know what.
Where does the Kemetic language coming from? Kemet, ancient Kemet, K-E-M-I-T.
I'm sorry, I don't know that. I don't know that language. I can't answer that question. I don't know. I don't have the knowledge. Yes, sir.
You had referred to something, connection between Finnish and Turkey.
Yes.
I remember like 30 years ago somebody mentioning that there was a connection between Finnish, Japanese, Hungarian.
Well, it's definitely connected to Hungarian. I cannot. I have no knowledge to even speculate on a Japanese connection, but I honestly find that kind of a bit of a stretch.
I actually saw something on the internet about it.
You would have to bring some very good proof to me before I would give credence to that.
But the Hungarian.
Well, the Hungarian Finnish one is strong, yes. If you've ever been next to a Hungarian, when you're with someone who's speaking Indo-European language, you can get a gist of what they're speaking about just by the way it sounds, particularly German.
Mm-hmm.
If you sat next to a Hungarian, it's no way. There's no way you can figure out what they're talking about. I had a workmate who was Hungarian. He was talking on the phone to his relatives, and I just had no idea what he was saying. Okay, any?
I have one more. You said that, Barry, you would use modern dictionaries and the other deciphers. Is that what you call?
Oh yes, there's plenty of good modern dictionaries, and if you've ever dealt with Germans, they are fanatically precise. So they produce the best dictionaries. So Barry always preferred to use German dictionaries because they were the best. They're the most comprehensive. They were the most thoroughly researched. And he used these for modern languages, which he would then be comparing to inscriptions in languages that he suspected were connected with the subject of these languages. He had hundreds of dictionaries. He could fill this room with all the every time he found a dictionary, he'd pick it up. Also, German researchers tend to do a lot of, Germans put great cultural emphasis on being multilingual, more so than other Europeans. And that has resulted in some very good comprehensive text. And what's been done, I'm sorry? Textbooks on linguistics. You know, for example, the Grimm's brothers, who are famous for fairy tales, actually were linguists. And they went around and studied, because in the little pockets of rural areas, what we call, would be the German equivalent of Appalachia, they spoke dialects which were very ancient. You know, you have High German and Low German and geographically different dialects. They went around and they noticed that the older forms of German would pronounce certain letters differently than the modern ones. And they noticed that certain letters evolved always in certain, in fact, they're called derivatives. That's the technical term for it. For example, the letter B, beta, is very frequently devolves into a letter V. You know, this is one that looks like that. In fact, in Russian, the letter B, written as a Roman B, is actually pronounced as a B. You know, so their word for Moscow, which is Moskva, to us, looking at it, looks like with a C instead of an S, like Mokba with a B, but it's actually a B. And you'll find the word, for example, gubernatorial. That's the Latin, the B, means a governor or a helmsman on a ship. In English and French, that's devolved to G-O-V, governor, gouverneur. But if you go to Spanish, you're back to abrigado, back to the B. Now that's just two, a B and V interchanging. There are many others. I think they've identified about what they call consonantal slide. I think that's the term they use, consonantal drift. The Grimm brothers identified about a dozen of these in Indo-European languages. So when you go back in these old scripts, you will find that this change in use of vowels appears. Anyway, that's why Barry liked dictionaries for modern languages. They work very well. You don't have to go back and find a dictionary of ancient Greek to apply his technique. A dictionary of modern Greek works very well too. And a lot easier to get your hands on. But you see, he simplified it so much that it just annoyed the heck out of the linguists, the guys who waited for that magic bilingual. And there's this bloody Harvard professor just cranking it out like nobody's business. And on top of that, he's a marine biologist. You know, and that's the biggest crime of all. Showing up the competition and being as an outsider is literally in academics the worst crime you can commit.
How can that be?
You're treading on somebody's turf. Is what it amounts to. It's like an outsider coming in and outshining the guy who's famous in your area. It's, you know, it's impolite.
I said something seemingly unrelated, but somehow it seems akin in my mind. Balgan Gadar Tilak. You familiar with him?
You're going to have to say that again.
Balgan Gadar Tilak wrote a
No.
piece wrote something called The Arctic Home of the Vedas.
I have no knowledge of that at all.
The reason why it seems similar to me is looking at a different, looking at the same set of data from a different standpoint.
Yes.
With a different background.
Yes.
He looked at the ancient Vedic texts and decided not to look at the astronomical comments, the comments of eclipses and stuff like that, as just passing or apocryphal or something like that, but instead went back and reconstructed geographically where you would have to have been to have made such an observation. He took those observations literally, and rewrote a portion of ancient history. And in a similar way,
Does it make sense what he did?
Absolutely.
Then there's probably validity to it.
Yeah, but it's something he was completely blasted as, by all the academics and stuff for rewriting.
Upsetting the status quo. That that's a major no-no. You know, that's what Galileo did to the church.
Yeah.
It's, you know, you can get yourself nailed to a post for that.
And it seems like your dad rewrote a certain portion of the history of human civilization and travels by looking at these language questions.
Yes.
Just as apparently he also did pre-human history with the study on the flora distribution.
Yes, yes. Yeah, he took his biological work and transferred it to languages, assuming languages. He was looking for evidence of downwind transmission of languages, which is what led him to his Polynesian works. But he had a background in Polynesia anyway. He grew up in New Zealand, so he had a familiarity. Now,
Was super lucky that he
that article I wrote got lambasted wickedly by German reviewers. But the problem there was that Germans, as I mentioned, very rigid, very precise. Whereas in Polynesia, among Polynesians, playing with language is a game. So creating puns and synonyms and fancy words like that it's in their culture as something clever you do. It's kind of like if you went to English or German and invented new ways to spell words. I mean, that would be horrors for the Germans. But for the Polynesian, it's considered fun and games. And, you know, unfortunately, my German critics did not understand that other people do not share their desire for precision.
I was watching something on either YouTube or History Channel. And they had this girl, that she all she did was travel, you know, to certain parts of the globe, and she went to, I think, French Polynesia. Some of the religious people, the Christians, couldn't understand how the Polynesians would speak, you know, in their own formal language.
Yes.
By the movements of the hands, yes, and the hips and the body. Mm-hmm. And they said it was so erotic for them that was a sign of the devil, you know. And they really didn't understand of how they communicated. You know?
I'm afraid when it comes to religions, anything that doesn't conform is a sign of the devil.
Uh-huh.
Yeah. I must admit that your average religious fanatic is not the most open-minded person you're
and they sure were. And I'm like, man, but you bet you come there and you want to force your belief on another culture. Talking about how bad that culture is living, and they still didn't get it.
Mm-hmm. No.
The religion,
I hate to say this, but I think religions, not just any one, all of them, that go out and try to convert other people, right, are very damaging to culture. Mm-hmm. Basically, they should just be slapped down and told to go home. It's too late now. Told to go home and leave people alone and let them be themselves. Mm-hmm. And accept the fact that people are different and choose to do things differently. I mean, here I am, I'm talking with my hands. I'm not telling you anything, but I'm just waving them around. And you were also. I mean, if I was German, I'd stand here like this. No offense to Germans. Great engineers, very precise dictionary manufacturers. But we all have our cultural weird oddities. You know, careful, my feet of clay are showing. Okay. Well, I've run out of stuff to think of. So
you're thinking of writing the rest down?
When I escape from my current imprisonment, I will, yes, I'd like to get back and complete 2 more articles. One on the North American written languages, and the other one of all the inscriptions Barry dug up well, he didn't dig up any. They were brought to him by people who had found them and couldn't figure out what they were. Now, of course, Barry also killed some research. It was student at Chicago was going to write a thesis on an inscription found in North Africa, which he was convinced proved that some ethnic group from far away had visited because of the similarities of the letters and symbols on the letter. And this was brought to my father by one of the professors of this student and said, "What do you think of this? You know, this neat thing from Africa." And I was in the room when it happened. Barry looked at it and then he just went like this. He says, "That's Greek." So simple as that. The guy's thesis just went through down the tube. It saved his reputation, because if somebody had done that after he'd done his thesis, he would have looked really silly. It was a very crude Greek inscription. It says basically the Greek sailor version of "I Kilroy was here." You know, crude thing. But you see, you know, the orientation. You have, when you get a thing, you have to make sure you got it the right way up when you're checking it out.
Tablets that you have to know whether you're reading it left to right, right to left,
Yeah.
whether you continue to do that or whether you zigzag,
Yeah.
or whether it goes in a circle.
Oh yeah.
You have to figure all that out.
Yep. That's true. And some of them, they start here and they go across, but typically they start out wide, but when they're getting to the edge of the page, they squeeze them together because they don't want to jump down.
Right.
And there's little clues like that. Yeah, and some of them go along and then they turn around and go again. I mean, we laugh, but that was the way they did it. And, you know, 2,000-3,000 years ago, that was the way it was done. You know, and even there was no fixed way of doing it. You know, your friend, you might go left to right. Your friend next door, in the same language, is going in the other direction. And Etruscan, for example, uses what we call today Roman letters, which is inaccurate. It'd be more accurate to say that Romans used Etruscan letters, but they reversed them. Etruscan was written from right to left, and the letters went that way, and the Romans just flipped it. And the letters the other way. So the Roman actually was derived from Etruscan. And the easiest way to read Etruscan is just to hold it up in the mirror. It makes it much easier to read because it's similar letters. And in fact, the convention among when studying Etruscan is that it's a lot easier just to reverse it and then print it that way, because it makes it so much easier for everybody else to follow. Okay.
Thank you.
Nothing else? Oh, it's fun. You're getting the brain wheels going again. They've been rusty for 20 years.
Is there any other material on this stuff, on the North American stuff, other than what you're preparing to write? Is there anything that has been written that's available?
Well, the journal Dad found that it has continued, but there haven't been any major new languages added to the list.
Right.
It's basically just reports on the existence of.
Are you talking about native? Or
No, I'm talking about the found inscriptions here,
right.
which are the descriptions that are indicative of visitation.
Right. Yeah.
But it's just published in that journal. There's no other place to find it.
Good luck trying to publish it anywhere else. You know, it's back to that Galileo thing. You know, there's this Galileo students tried to get papers published by the Vatican. Yeah. The 3 chances of that: fat, slim, and none. Okay, I guess we're done.
Nice.
Oh, it was fun. Sorry about the phone. These things are the curse of man.
They are.
At least you got your luggage back.
Well, you got to promise.
Bye, guy.
Yeah.